Everything started on a fateful day, when Luke was about to receive his gift just like every other person in his village did once they attained the right age. His dad was proud because he strongly believed that his son would awaken as a battle lord. Currently, the royal family had lost its power, leading to frequent territorial clashes, so Luke, being the son of a lord, was expected to receive a gift suited for combat like his father. Even better for Luke, his mother was a swordsman, while his father was a holy swordsman of a higher rank who earned the title of a marquis. So naturally, he expected the same from his son, and Luke was sure he wouldn't let his father down. As Luke stood to receive his blessing with his stepbrother, the villagers expected that he'd awaken an extraordinary gift, so everyone watched in anticipation while the priest motioned for them to be silent. Quite oddly, he announced that Luke was blessed with the gift of village building. The boy was dismayed and surprised, so he asked what sort of gift that was, and the priest said it was certainly not a gift that was useful in combat. It felt like Luke's world had come crashing down, and the villagers had now lost all sense of hope, even when Luke's stepbrother, Raoul, rudely shoved him aside to receive his own blessing. Much surprisingly, the priest announced that Raoul was blessed with the gift of holy swordsmanship. This made the villagers quite elated, while Luke's dad and glorified baby mama hugged their son proudly. On the other hand, Luke and his disappointed mom were completely ignored. The next scene showed Luke leaving the town, but none of his parents came to see him off, so he got in a cart and headed north toward some uninhabited wilderness that belonged to the family. It so happened that Luke was tasked with developing that uninhabited area, and it was his narcissistic brother's idea, who just wanted him to be exiled. No one could oppose him because Luke's gift was more worthless than memecoins, but Raoul was the agile warrior they all needed. Besides, Luke had never been the fighting type, and even though his family was a long line of warriors, he just wanted to be a soft boy with a trust fund and a harem. Soon, the cart stopped at the supposed place, and Luke was even more disappointed when he saw the state of the land. Even worse, it was in between a deadly forest and a mountain, which were both said to be teeming with monsters. He dragged his luggage and wondered how he was supposed to survive in such a place all by himself. However, he suddenly saw his maid, Milia, encouraging him not to despair and praising him for maintaining a positive attitude despite everything. He asked her if she was sure about staying with him, and she said she couldn't spend a day without his cream sauce and that she was willing to serve him loyally until the very end. While Luke was glad to see that there was still someone who loved him so much, Milia's loyalty was that strong because she was an obsessed Shodakan. Anyway, she shared that he only had two options, the first being to survive in the barren land, although they were running low on unlimited supplies, while the second option was to elope with her to a brand new city. It was obvious that Milia preferred the second option, and frankly, that was the most feasible option they had, so Luke was about to consider it too. But he was curious about his village building power because he had not used it ever since he was blessed with it. He randomly clenched his fist, but suddenly a holographic screen appeared and startled him, while Milia, who couldn't see the screen, suspected that he knew her lewd fantasies. The screen popped a message, but when Milia blinded him with her water balloons, Luke couldn't see what was written and had to tell her to back off. The message read that their current location was great for a new village creation, but it was written in a foreign language, and Luke wondered just how he could recognize the letters. It wasn't surprising because he always had memories of a past life he couldn't explain, which made him feel odd and was probably related to his gift. Although he wasn't sure about his decision, Luke agreed to create the village, and right before them, a magical occurrence happened, and the ground spontaneously leveled itself. On the stat window, Luke was at level 1 and had 50 points in his village. But there was a list of things he could choose to build, and even though Luke didn't really understand these things, there was no harm in trying, so he chose to build a small hut. That required just 10 points from him, and the moment he clicked yes, a hut suddenly appeared in front of them, much to Milia's surprise. With a daily refresh point of 10 points and only 40 points left, Luke wondered if he should build another small hut, but Milia suggested that they both manage the tiny hut and instead build a well because water was the top priority for them. Again, Luke did the impossible, and a modified well appeared out of nowhere. He tried to take off the lid, but found out that he only needed to use the lever to get some water, and this was a lot better than the manual method of obtaining water in his father's castle. This left him with only 10 points, and Milia said he should build a field next, but the status window popped up and asked if he would like to turn Milia into a villager. With her permission, he did so and got an extra point, and for every new villager he added, the system would award him with 1 point every day. For now, they didn't need any more villages, and Milia had to make sure he knew she was the only one who could seize his breath with her airbags. As they retired for the night, Luke accepted his gift as a blessing in disguise because he would never have wanted to live in a world where all he did was shed blood. He had finally decided that he would use his new life to create his own village and make it so peaceful to suit his personality. While he was dreaming and oozing hot sauce from his sausage, Milia couldn't have enough of him and wished he could share all that with her. The next day, a young lady named Selin decided to leave her father's home, but he questioned her reason, and it was simply that she had endured enough of Raoul's madness. She preferred it when she was engaged to Luke, but Raoul was too much for her to handle because he was always downing 10 packs of Viagra and tearing her fish pie. However, her father reminded her that they needed the marriage for some dumb political reasons, but Selin would rather die a nun than get married to that rabid stallion. The guards tried stopping her, but one fierce look from her was enough to make them question their manhoods. Eventually, she had her way and shut the door right behind her. On the other hand, Milia was enjoying a night of getting bulldozed by Luke, and she later got up earlier because she felt obligated to do so as his maid. But he told her not to because she was now a villager and no longer his maid. To that, she said she was going to support him to the best of her ability, and her mind traveled back to the day she first arrived at the castle, when she was younger. She was also of noble birth, but from a low-ranking family, and the only option available to her kind was to marry or serve as a maid in a higher-ranking noble family. Moving into the Albert family, Milia struggled to adapt, and on an unfortunate day, she accidentally broke Luke's mother's favorite dish, so the woman scolded her mercilessly until Luke stepped in and took the blame for the broken dish. This calmed his mother, but she still somehow blamed Milia for it, although the maid was actually surprised that Luke took the fall for her mistake. When his mom left, Luke explained that he deliberately did what he did because he knew she'd be a lot easier on him than on Milia. It was in that moment that Milia saw a true Sigma who had won her heart, and she'd sworn to serve him loyally. Back to the present day, Luke had accumulated up to 20 points, which was enough to create a field, and he planned to toil the soil with his own hands, even though Milia felt he was too noble for such dirty work. Watching him work the soil made her wish that he could work her wet rose garden with those strong hands. At the end of the day, Luke took a long, refreshing bath, and a bathroom idea suddenly popped into his head. Since they hadn't experienced any monster attacks, Luke thought to create something to serve as a defense, so he later created a watchtower. As days went by, Luke achieved more feats and even created a wall, while their field started sprouting. But suddenly, a loud sound occurred and Milia quickly ran to check it out at the watchtower. While she ascended the tower, it occurred to her that she didn't think before climbing, and Luke could probably see that she borrowed her grandmother's sagging underwear. But she found that he wasn't even looking, and then she saw that a horde of goblins were headed their way. Initially, they couldn't get over the wall until they began to use themselves as ladders to go over it. This left Luke with no option but to fight, so he told Milia to stay back while he took up a sword, glad for all the years of training he invested in it. One of the goblins rushed to attack him, but Luke was swift to block his attack with his sword, and even sliced the ugly thing into equal halves. More and more of them kept coming for him, but Luke didn't stop fighting. However, one goblin took him by surprise, and the moment it approached him, something out of the blue stoned its ugly skull. Luke looked at the wall and found that it was Selin, standing on the fence. Known as the Ice Princess, Selin was Luke's fiancée who possessed dual-wielding and livened magic, allowing her to fight with two blades and use water and ice magic. Seeing her in the wilderness all of a sudden, Luke asked Selin why she was there, but she tried to change the topic. He insisted on the question, and she eventually shared that she ran away from home, cut ties with everyone, and broke off her engagement to Raoul. Again, she shared that being a virgin until she was 90 was a better choice than getting married to that scoundrel. All the while, Luke never noticed that she'd been against the marriage until now, so he apologized to her for the lack of freedom she experienced when it came to getting married. However, she told him that marriage was not the problem, and it was just Raoul. But if she had gotten married to Luke, she'd have liked it. Just then, Milia came in to separate whatever mushiness was going on and warned that they shouldn't have private talks. She introduced herself as the first villager and Luke as the village head. So Selin asked how the heck they had a hut, a wall, and a well already because it was impossible to accept that they did it all by themselves. Instead of explaining, Luke moved to demonstrate exactly how it all happened, and so he created a storehouse that appeared out of the blue. Selin was surprised, and when Luke told her the other thugs he could create with his gift, she was really amazed that such a skill existed. At least that explained why he seemed to have covered much in a very short time. The system instantly asked if he would turn Selin into a villager, but he couldn't think of forcing her to live in such a whack place. He also pointed out that his family may not stay quiet about the whole engagement thing because it was supposed to ally his much more powerful family with her seemingly weaker one. However, she said the Alberts won't waste time getting pissed at her family, and her family, on the other hand, won't survive making more enemies. She didn't care though, because she was supposed to get married to Luke anyway, and since her brother awakened a powerful skill, her family would be fine. Much surprisingly, Selin mentioned that she could hang in his village for a bit, but Luke wasn't prepared for that, and the moment she said she had nowhere else to go, the system automatically accepted her as a villager, increasing his daily points to 12 points. He brought her to realize that he didn't have any proper food, and with her gift, she was sure to find better places to live. But she misunderstood him to be implying that her existence was a burden to him. But the even more important issue was that those two ladies were glaring at each other like two territorial lionesses and began arguing. Milia said the village wasn't a nice place for prim and proper trust fund babies, but Selin shaded her, saying at least she had skills that could protect Luke, unlike Milia, who graduated Janitor Academy with honors. The maid, however, said she was the first villager, which made her the senior in that case, but Selin mocked her failed attempt at exerting dominance over her. This resorted to Milia mocking Selin's chest fruits and saying they reminded her of peanuts. But Selin wasn't having this and claimed she was a B-cup. So Milia had even more fun and said there was more hope for an old raggedy grandma to grow succulent melons than there was for Selin. A point, Luke just had to walk away to protect his peace from these women. But a few moments later, Selin barged in on Milia, massaging Luke with her natural pillows, and she was mad that they'd been sleeping in such a cramped space. But Milia simply asked if she had a problem with that and started pushing her out of the room since she was trying to be silly. To quell things down, Luke suggested that he'd probably sleep in the storehouse, but the ladies weren't having it and didn't agree to it, although Selin implied that Milia naturally belonged to the storehouse. This was suggestive of the fact that she just wanted to get raw and dirty with Luke that night, so Milia called her out and started another fight, leading to Luke finalizing that he was going to stay in the warehouse. Eventually, they convinced him to lie sandwiched between them while they took him on a mental ride to the land of ecstasy. Briefly, let's see things from Selin's point of view. On her first visit to the Albert Castle, her father advised her to act properly because Luke was likely to become her husband someday, but she really didn't understand what was going on. Her father briefly excused himself, and she suddenly saw a stone land right next to her feet. She traced the direction from where it came and saw some boy playing in the fields, which she thought was probably Luke. However, she later saw another boy tied up to a tree and Raoul kept throwing stones at him, aiming this time around his face. But Selin quickly jumped in and asked him what the hoot he thought he was about to do. Raoul claimed that he was only having fun, but she tried stopping him from throwing and potentially giving the boy a fatal wound. The psychopath said he didn't care if the boy died, because he could simply get others to have fun with, so he eventually had his way with the stone. Unfortunately, the stone landed on Luke's head, so Selin asked if he was alright, and they both untied the boy from the tree. Raoul immediately ran off and said he wasn't really aiming for Luke, but Selin couldn't get the guy's deal. It was much later that she learned that the young Ted Bundy-looking dude was Luke's stepbrother, and she was glad that wasn't the Luke she was looking for. Years later, they met again, and Selin asked if Luke ever brought up what Raoul did to him because it was a big deal that the concubine's son hurt the legal son. But Luke was trying to protect his brother's already damaged reputation, and even though Selin wished he taught the rowdy dude a lesson, Luke was only watching out for his brother, who already had to deal with people's negative comments about him being his father's baby mama's son. Hearing him speak again like that made Selin feel so lucky that the kind and considerate Luke was her fiancé. Currently, Luke was glad to have accumulated up to 54 points, because that meant he could build a big house and prevent a potential World War III between his main chick and the side chick. He eventually got to the house, and they were surprised to see that there was furniture there, and there was a glass cooker in the kitchen too, which Selin thought to be some magical instrument. The running water from the tap also intrigued them, and Luke explains that the so-called magical instrument was a cooking stove using gas, after which he went on to demonstrate by turning on the ignition. This was great news for Helen because at least she could cook easily for her baby daddy. He also took them to the bathroom and showed them that what they thought was a chair was actually a toilet that could flush and all. Selin asked whether the sewage would end up because on a castle, the servants were usually tasked with collecting the sewage. Anyway, they felt the gods would deal with that themselves, and Selin was only glad they no longer had to use the well outside. For Luke, the biggest thing was that they now had 2 separate bedrooms, but this felt like the beginning of the biggest fight about to be witnessed because neither of the ladies was willing to share a bedroom with the other. Eventually, he had to agree that they'd sleep in the same room, although his initial plan was to sleep on the floor and have the ladies take the bed. However, it was out of his control and both ladies would rather remain sandwiched to him. A month had passed since Luke relocated to a barren land, and he'd been grateful for just how far he'd come already. One morning, Selin had just hunted a wild boar for them from the forest up north, but Luke felt this was risky behavior and warned her against it. She was really hungry for some meat and already had a means to preserve it with her magic. With another thing to brag about against Milia, Selin smiled scornfully because she felt more useful than Milia. But the maid wasn't having it because she was the only one preparing all their meals while Selin sat on her high horse, thinking she was Elon Musk's 30th child. Right then, they both aggressively started chopping the meat until Selin overheard voices approaching them. They climbed the watchtower to confirm and saw there was indeed a group of people outside the fence. However, these didn't seem to be harmful people because they looked hungry and worn out and were probably refugees from a recent battle. Luke couldn't bear to ignore these helpless folks, so he walked up and found out that they didn't even know there was a village on the way. He introduced himself and the head and founder of the village, while the leader of the other group introduced himself as Burlet. These dudes all looked so pathetic that Luke was moved, so he led them to his well and told them to drink as much water as they wanted. They were glad, but didn't know how exactly to get water out of the well, so he demonstrated how to use the pump, making them all amazed at that technological advancement. This made Luke decide to make another awl, and he told them to feel free to use out as they wanted. And after they drank enough water, Burlet shared that they left their village behind and most of the men were drafted, while the older folks stayed behind, including his old father. Until now, they'd been wandering pointlessly and were down to their last bits of food and water, had they not found Luke's village. Luke said they didn't have enough food because they were yet to harvest their crops, but he shared some of his meat with them, and they were so glad to eat that they were moved to tears. Burlet watched his wife and offspring eating, and was so glad that he broke down crying, asking how he could ever repay Luke for his kindness. But he was quite worried about them because they had more hardship to encounter in the future, and it'd be impossible for them to survive in the wasteland. He enthusiastically asked Burlet if he'd like to live there because they were shorthanded on people to help till the soil. But Burlet said his group was mostly composed of women and children, so they'd be a handful to feed and wouldn't be a reliable source of labor. Still, Luke truthfully confessed that the three of them had been relying on stored grains they'd taken from the castle and didn't have the slightest idea how to make it on their own, so he wanted Burlet to help them. Tearfully, he agreed, and almost immediately, the system welcomed all 51 of the Burlet caravan as villagers. This took Luke to village level 2 and gave him 100 bonus points, in addition to another facility. He was scared, but before he knew it, he'd leveled up to village level 3 and had 764 village points and would be getting 83 points daily. Now, he had 2 additional skills named Assess Villager and Move Facility. Luke understood the whole getting points for leveling up his village and all that, but he didn't really understand what these skills meant. He activated the Move Facility feature and saw that his house had moved, much to his excited surprise. While he was celebrating his new skill, Burlet was trembling as he reported that the buildings were moving. He felt he was seeing things and had lost his mind from the exhaustion, so he passed out and Luke had to explain to Burlet's wife that it was his gift. She was thrilled that he had a gift, and the younger ones around also wanted to see what a gift was because it was strange to them. He told them he had the gift of village building, but no one wanted to be the dirty sweaty mason with really nice abs when they could just be Batman. Luke later decided to make better houses for the villagers and selected a row house with 5 living spaces, each space having 2 bedrooms and 1 toilet. Such a space would be enough for a family of 5, but these houses, unfortunately, didn't have baths, so he told them they'd have to make do with the wells since the system gave him no option of baths. Seeing that each row house could accommodate 25 people and only cost 80 points, he went on to create more row houses and expand the crops. Burlet thanked him for his handwork, so Luke decided to rest for the day. The new villagers all seemed like nice people, and Luke decided to use the villagers' assessing skill, which showed him someone's skill, his high level of loyalty towards the village, and that he had a gift of swordsmanship. Suddenly Luke felt guilty because the system had shown him how long and fat Barlat's shaft was, but he surely got curious about the gift part and asked the man what his gift was. He innocently answered that there was no church nearby to bless him with his gift, and he didn't feel talented enough to get one. Luke wondered if the guy would actually get the gift of swordsmanship if he'd been blessed in a church, so later he discussed it with Selin and Milia. They were mostly surprised that he possessed the ability to see a villager's potential gift, even if they currently knew nothing about it. He tried the feature on Selin and got her accurate readings, including the fact that her recommended job was to be a general. But she was curious about the village loyalty parameter because hers was high. He explained that if villagers had a low village loyalty score, they were more likely to be rebellious and commit crimes, so he'd be careful with those people. Hearing this, Selin advised that they screen everyone in the village since they needed their manpower, but Luke was worried that there would be some people who wouldn't want the assessment. Selin advised that he didn't have to tell them anything about the assessment he was doing, and that he should just ask them questions from what he saw on their assessment window to see if they'd lie or tell the truth. He agreed to do that, but Selin suggested that Milia could also get checked. However, the maid wasn't confident enough to try because she thought the system would reveal the wicked things she'd planned to do to Luke's body, so she ran off and said he was too young to see those things, so she'd go cool off. Later, Luke met Burlet and asked for his name and other stuff, so he volunteered truthful information, and even introduced Luke to his younger brother, who was Barlat. He also introduced a couple more, including his little ones and an old Karen, so Luke got the statistics of everyone there, and even stumbled across some rare talents, including an apothecary, a maze explorer, a wordsmith, and a rubric magician. Later, Selin asked him how the exercise went and was thrilled to find that he'd found a great deal of talented magicians, but the issue was that only an oracle or the church could bestow such blessings upon anyone. This made Luke sad because he grew up hearing that only nobles usually got blessings of gifts, but in his village, he saw these commoners with numerous gifts, and it only means they were being lied to all along. Actually, one had to give a huge donation to the church to get blessed with gifts, but that was all just a lie created by the nobles and the church to restrict the distribution of blessings. Just then, Milia approached him and suddenly turned a bucket of water on her head to keep her mind in a blank state. She suddenly ripped her shirt open and told him to inspect every inch of her cannonballs, but Luke told her to hold that thought for later that night. Before he got ready to use his assessment skill on her, he and Selin felt she'd be recommended for a maid position, so Selin told him to read her stats out loud. The status window showed that her village loyalty was at an ultimate level, but even more surprisingly, it showed that she was recommended for the job of a priestess because she possessed the gift of an oracle. It was great news that Milia had a potential oracle gift, but even to activate it, they would have to get a priest. Otherwise, her blessing would remain dormant. Luke knew of people who got their gifts after praying in church, but his current village didn't even have one in the first place. Interrupting his thoughts, Berlin shared that the vegetables Luke had planted earlier were ready to be harvested and had grown really big. This must have been because the soil was a really good one and the system gave him an option to select a great field for that. By sunset, they'd harvested a load of products, and they were looking juicy, so Luke decided to host a welcome party for the villagers. Milia got coming, but Luke and Selin joined in to help her, so she was really glad that despite his status, the young guy was still eager to help. However, she almost immediately regretted her decision because he was supposed to be slicing some vegetables but found a way to unleash his inner assassin. She quickly jumped in and asked him to wash the veggies instead, but Selin bragged about being so good with a knife better than she was with her tongue, terrifying them both. Eventually, dinner was ready and the villagers came in to eat, glad because they'd never had such a grand feast. They looked for Luke and asked him to open the feats with a toast, after which they all dug into Milia's warm, juicy dish